I bought a small cabin in the middle of nowhere for one reason: peace. After 15 years as an investigative reporter, I was completely burned out. I just wanted to listen to the creak behind my house and finally be left alone. But my new uphill neighbor, the president of a wealthy HOA, had a very different plan for the valley. Her name was Karen, and she decided her rich community needed a private lake. So she built a monstrous, illegal dam. She didn't get permits. She didn't hire engineers. She just piled up dirt and rock, creating a ticking time bomb right above my home. And almost overnight, my creek, it just dried up. The silence that replaced it was terrifying. When I tried to warn her, politely, that her dam was not only illegal but dangerously unstable, she threatened to sue me into oblivion. She told me I had no idea who I was messing with. She was right about one thing. She had no idea who she was messing with. She thought I was just some random guy in a cabin. She didn't know I spent my entire career digging up secrets and exposing criminals far more powerful than her. So I started building a file. An explosive file. One that would prove her criminal negligence and expose her to the entire state. I was literally one click away from sending that file to the authorities when the ground started to shake. It was just a small earthquake, but it was all it took. Her unstable, illegal dam completely failed. I watched as her entire private lake came crashing down the hill in a wave of mud and catastrophic karma, wiping out everything she had built. This is the story of how an arrogant HOA president tried to silence me and ended up getting destroyed by her own deadly secret, and how the file I built was the final nail in her coffin. It's wild to think it all came to that. For 15 years, my name was Mark, and my entire identity was my job. I worked for a major city paper. I was the guy who dug up the corruption, the one who sat through mind-numbing 6-hour city council meetings just to catch one shady vote. I chased politicians down hallways. I lived on stale coffee, adrenaline, and the thrill of an anonymous source picking up the phone. My job was to find the truth, no matter how deep it was buried or who it anyoed. But that life, it costs you. It really does. It costs you sleep. It costs you relationships. After a particularly nasty story involving a state senator, a case that dragged on for a year and involved threats I'd rather not repeat, I just broke. I was done. I felt hollowed out. The adrenaline was gone, and all that was left was the exhaustion. I was 40 years old and I felt 60. I wasn't just burned out, I was scorched. So I did what any sane, scorched person would do. I liquidated my 401k, sold my tiny condo in the city, and bought the cheapest, most remote cabin I could find. It was 3 hours from my old life. It was at the bottom of a long, winding dirt road in a valley. It wasn't much, just one big room, a solid roof, a wood-burning stove, and spotty cell service on a good day. But it was mine. And the best part? The sound. The cabin was built right next to a small, fast-moving creek. For the first week I was there, that's all I did. I sat on my rickety porch with a cup of coffee and just listened. I listened to the water bubbling over the rocks. I listened to the wind in the pine trees. I listened to the birds that didn't have to compete with traffic noise or sirens. It was the first time in 15 years my shoulders weren't permanently hunched up around my ears. My teeth weren't clenched. I was finally actually breathing. This was it. This was the peace I had been craving. My little cabin was at the bottom of the valley, tucked away in the trees. But if I looked up, way up, I could see them. On the ridge, catching the sun, was the Summit Creek HOA. This wasn't an old, established neighborhood. This was new money defined. I called them glass boxes. They were massive, 10,000 square foot monstrosities of steel and glass, perched on lots that had been clear-cut of every single tree. They all had matching 3-car garages, perfectly manicured green lawns, in a place that shouldn't have green lawns, and a giant, gaudy stone gate at the entrance. It was the kind of place where people buy privacy, but also want everyone to see exactly how much their privacy cost. I had no interaction with them, and I planned to keep it that way. My property wasn't part of their HOA, thank God. The only reason I knew anything about them was because the one mailman who services the whole valley loved to talk. He told me the place was run by one woman, the HOA president, a woman named, and I am not making this up, Karen. According to him, she was a walking nightmare. The kind of person who measures the height of her neighbor's grass with a ruler. The kind of person who finds you if your trash cans are visible from the street for more than 1 hour after pickup. He said she had apparently tried to get him fired for leaving tire tracks on the pristine asphalt road after a rainstorm. She was power-obsessed, bored, and had way too much of her husband's money to throw around. She ran that HOA like her own personal kingdom. It's funny, every neighborhood seems to have one. I'm sure you all have your own Karen stories. Let me know in the comments what's the craziest HOA rule you've ever had to deal with. I'd love to read them. At the time I just laughed. It was gossip. It was a world away from me. I was down in my quiet little valley, listening to my creek. She was up on her glass throne, miles up the ridge. What did I care? I was retired. I was out of the game. I just wanted to chop wood, read books, and be left alone. I truly believed I could. I really thought she and her little kingdom would never, ever affect me. I had no idea that, at that very moment, she was already making plans. Plans that would steal my peace, destroy my property, and change everything. I was wrong. So wrong. My new life of peace lasted exactly 3 weeks. The first sign that something was deeply, fundamentally wrong wasn't something I saw. It was something I felt. It was a hum. A low, vibrating, incessant hum. It wasn't just a sound, it was a pressure in the air. I felt it in my teeth, deep in my fillings. I felt it in my chest. It was the kind of sound that, once you notice it, you can't unnotice it. It was constant, day and night. It got into my head, thrumming against my skull when I tried to read, when I tried to sleep. It was the exact opposite of the natural peace I had craved. It sounded industrial, machine-like. And then came the silence. I was sitting on my porch, grinding my teeth against that awful hum, when I realized the creek was quiet. My beautiful, bubbling creek, it wasn't bubbling anymore. I walked over to the bank. The water, which had been fast and clear, was now a pathetic, shallow stream. The rocks that were normally underwater were now exposed, drying in the sun and starting to grow a film of green algae. I stared, my stomach tightening. This wasn't a drought. This was not a drought. This happened in less than 48 hours. The next morning, I went out with my coffee, and the silence was total. The hum was still there, a low-frequency torture. But the creek was gone. It was just a wet, muddy scar in the earth. The sound that had healed me, the sound that had been the entire point of this place, had been stolen. I stood there looking at the dead creek bed, and that old, familiar feeling started to prickle at the back of my neck. The feeling I got when a source told me to look at the building permits. The feeling I got when a politician's story just didn't add up. It was the feeling of a lie. My retirement was officially over. I went back inside, to a trunk I hadn't opened since I moved. Under a pile of old notebooks, there it was, my drone. It was a professional-grade quadcopter I used to use for getting establishing shots for my video stories. The battery was still charged. I took it out to my porch. The little cabin sat at the bottom of the valley, and the creek, or what was the creek, snaked its way up the ravine towards the summit creekage. I powered on the controller, the drone zipped up into the air, and I sent it straight up the valley, following the dry creek bed like a map. I flew it for maybe half a mile, up and over the pine trees, getting higher and higher up the ridge. And then I saw it. My jaw literally dropped. I just stared at the little video screen. It was a dam. A massive, massive earthen dam. It was a mountain of freshly moved raw red clay and boulders, piled at least 40 feet high, stretching across the entire ravine. It was ugly. It was new. And it was holding back an enormous, placid body of water, water that should have been in my creek. On the far side of this new lake, I could see the sunlight glinting off the glassbox mansions of the HOA. They had built their own private lake. And the dam itself, my God. I'm not an engineer, but I've covered enough infrastructure stories to know what I'm looking at. It was a disaster waiting to happen. There was no concrete spillway. There was no proper reinforcement. It was just a giant, unstable pile of dirt. And they had built it directly uphill from me. Then I saw the source of the hum. At the far end of the lake, near a pump house, a thick pipe was spewing water into the lake, water it was clearly siphoning from another source, the main spring that fed the whole valley. They weren't just damming the creek, they were stealing the water to fill their new toy. I brought the drone back, my hands shaking, but not from fear, from a cold, focused anger. These people weren't just arrogant. They were dangerous. They were criminals. And they were stupid. I decided to be the reasonable one. I was going to give them one chance to fix this before I went full investigative reporter on them. I found the public-facing contact email for the Summit Creek HOA board, which I knew went directly to Karen. I drafted the most polite, professional, and logical email I could. I titled it, Urgent Safety Concern, New Dam Construction. Dear Ms. Karen's last name and the Summit Creek board, I wrote. My name is Mark, and I'm your neighbor in the cabin at the bottom of the valley. I'm writing with an urgent concern. In the last 48 hours, the creek on my property has completely run dry. Using a drone to investigate the source, I discovered the new dam you've constructed. This dam appears to be the direct cause. I kept going. More importantly, as a journalist who has covered civil engineering projects, I am deeply concerned about the dam's stability. A structure of this size, holding back that much water, typically requires extensive geological surveys, permits, and engineered spillways to be safe. Given our region's seismic activity, an unengineered earthen dam poses a catastrophic failure risk to properties downstream, namely, my property. I finished it politely. I'm sure you have all the permits and engineering reports on file, but I wanted to raise the alarm directly in case the contractor you used was not licensed for this scale of work. Please let me know when this can be rectified. Sincerely, Mark. I hit send. I felt good. It was rational. It was clear. It was helpful. The reply came in less than 10 minutes. It was not polite. It was not rational. It was from Karen. Through my last name, it began. Our private lake is the exclusive property of the Summit Creek HOA. It was built by licensed professionals, and we are not required to discuss our amenities with non-members. My eyes narrowed. Licensed professionals? I already doubted that. The state of your creek is not our concern, she continued. This valley has droughts. That is not our problem. Furthermore, your use of a drone to spy on our private property is an illegal invasion of privacy and harassment. We have a record of your email. Cease all contact immediately, or we will take legal action. I just stared at the screen. The arrogance. The stupidity. The open, hostile lie. She didn't just dismiss my concern. She threatened me. She thought I was some yokel she could bully into silence. That was her second mistake. I replied, Ma'am, with all due respect, this is not about amenities. This is about water rights, which you are violating, and public safety. An unpermitted dam of this size is a felony, not a private matter. The dam is unstable. You are putting my life and property at risk. This is my final attempt to resolve this politely. I shouldn't have bothered. She didn't reply to that email. Instead, 2 days later, I got a certified letter. I thought, hey, here it comes. The lawyer letter. I was wrong. It was worse. It was a notice of nuisance from the Summit Creek HOA. It was on their official letterhead with their embossed logo, and it was CC'd to Summit Creek Legal Counsel. It was a list of violations. My violations. They were fining me. Violation, unapproved external structure, firewood shed. Violation, unkempt property, excessive natural undergrowth. Violation, dilapidated fencing. I was standing in a forest, and they were citing me for excessive natural undergrowth. I wasn't even in their HOA. This was a power play. A transparent, childish, and pathetic attempt to intimidate me, to bury me in paperwork, to show me she was the boss. I actually laughed. I crumpled up the letter. She had no idea. She was a petty tyrant with a clipboard, and she thought she was a queen. The real lawyer letter came the next day. This one was from a high-priced law firm in the city. It was a formal cease and desist. It demanded I immediately stop harassing the board. It demanded I destroy all drone footage. It threatened a massive lawsuit for stalking, trespass, and invasion of privacy. And then I read the last line. A direct quote, no doubt dictated by Karen herself. You should have stayed in the city. You have no idea who you're messing with, and I will bury you in legal fees if you so much as look up this hill again. I read that line twice. I folded the letter calmly. I put it on my desk. Bury me? I looked out the window at the muddy, dry creek bed, and then up the hill, where I knew her ticking time bomb was sitting. I turned back to my computer. Okay, Karen, I said to the empty room. Let's dig. She had just picked a fight with a man who kept shovels for a living. So I started digging. That very night, I poured a fresh cup of coffee, sat down at my desk, and let the old instincts take over. The feeling was familiar. It was almost a relief. The fog of my burnout, that constant, heavy exhaustion I'd been living with, it all just started to clear. It was replaced by that cold, clean, sharp-edged focus I used to live on. My fingers flew across the keyboard. I wasn't looking for secrets, not yet. I was just pulling on the public threads. County Assessor's Office Database. State Water Rights Board. County Planning and Permits Portal. I was looking for the basics. Who was this contractor they supposedly hired? Did they ever file for a grading permit? A building permit? A water diversion permit? It took about 20 minutes to find the first giant, flapping red flag. Or rather, the complete lack of one. I ran a comprehensive search on the HOA's entire parcel of land, going back 5 years. The search results came back clean. Nothing. No permits filed. Not for a shed, not for a fence, and certainly not for a 40-foot-high, multi-thousand-ton earthen dam. Karen hadn't just skipped a permit. She had skipped all of them. She had just done it. She'd hired some guy with a bulldozer and told him to build a mountain. I was so focused, I was so in the zone, that I almost didn't hear the truck coming down my long gravel driveway. It wasn't the mailman's little Subaru. This was a heavier engine, rumbling and slow. I looked up just as the headlights swept across my window, blinding me. A car door slammed. Then, a sharp, official-sounding knock on my cabin door. My heart didn't race. I just felt curious. I opened it. It was a man in a rumpled, cheap-looking suit, holding a clipboard and a thick, heavy manila envelope. He looked annoyed, like my cabin was the last stop on a very long, very bad day. Mark? My last name? He grunted. I just nodded. You've been served. He didn't wait for a reply. He shoved the envelope into my hand, had me sign his little clipboard with a grainy ballpoint pen, and turned around. He was back in his truck and peeling out before I had even closed the door. I stood there in my quiet cabin, under the warm light of a single lamp, holding this thing. It was heavy. I walked to my desk, set it down, and turned on the bright overhead light. I didn't rip it open. I calmly picked up my letter opener and slit the top. I slid the thick stack of papers out. On the top page, in bold, black letters, civil summons. And right below it, Summit Creek Homeowners Association versus Mark, my last name. My blood didn't boil. It turned to ice. I sat down and I read the accusations. One by one. Harassment. Stalking. Invasion of privacy. My personal favorite, drone espionage. They were seeking damages. $50,000. Plus all legal fees. $50,000. This wasn't a threat anymore. This wasn't a bluff from a high-priced lawyer. This was a filing. This was a real, active lawsuit sitting in the county court system designed to do exactly what Karen's letter said, bury me. This was a slap suit. A strategic lawsuit against public participation. I'd written about these. It's a classic bully tactic. You file a completely baseless, fraudulent lawsuit against someone who is trying to expose you, knowing they can't afford the legal fight. You bleed them dry in court, rack up tens of thousands in their legal bills, until they give up, shut up, and go bankrupt. I stood there for a long time, just looking at the papers. The cheap, recycled paper. The smudged ink from a low-toner printer. This was the moment everything changed. This was the point of no return. Karen wasn't just an arrogant woman with bad taste in architecture. She wasn't just a petty tyrant. She was malicious. She was actively, knowingly, and illegally trying to destroy me. To ruin me financially. All because I asked her to fix the ticking time bomb she built. She was willing to lie, to commit perjury, to file a fraudulent case, all because I'd pointed out that her private lake was a public menace. A slow, cold smile spread across my face. It wasn't a happy one. It was the smile I got when a corrupt councilman finally lied to my face on the record, not knowing my tape recorder was running. Karen had just made the single stupidest, most catastrophic mistake of her life. She thought this lawsuit was her weapon. She had no idea it was about to become mine. She thought she could bury me in paperwork. She just gave me the legal right to all of her paperwork. This lawsuit gave me the power of discovery. It meant I could now legally, through the court, demand her emails, her text messages, her contracts with that bulldozer guy, the HOA's meeting minutes where they voted on this, their bank statements showing who they paid and when, everything. She hadn't shut me up. She had just handed me the keys to her entire kingdom. I looked at the ridiculous $50,000 lawsuit on my desk. Then I looked at my computer screen, where the "No permits found" message was still flashing. "Okay, Karen," I whispered to the empty room. "You want a war? You've got one." The investigation wasn't a side project anymore. It wasn't just about my creek. This was my only job. Retired Mark was gone. Mark, the investigative reporter, was back. And I wasn't just building a file anymore. I was building her coffin. And I wasn't just building a file anymore. I was building her coffin. But a coffin needs nails. The lawsuit she'd filed wasn't a weapon against me. It was the hammer. Now, I just needed to calmly, methodically, and professionally gather the nails. The very next morning, I was on the phone. I wasn't calling a defense attorney. I was calling a predator. I still had contacts, and I asked for the meanest, most aggressive slapsuit specialist in the state. I got a name. A man named David, a bulldog of a lawyer who apparently loathed corrupt HOAs more than anyone on earth. I was in his downtown office 2 days later, the $50,000 lawsuit sitting on his polished mahogany desk between us. I didn't lead with the lawsuit. I led with my findings. I handed him a thin folder. "Before we start," I said, "this is the county permit search for the HOA's land. You'll note there are 0 permits filed for any kind of construction, grading, or water diversion." He put on his glasses and read the printout. He looked at it for a long, silent 30 seconds. Then he looked back up at me, and his eyes were practically gleaming. "And then they served you with this drone espionage lawsuit?" he asked, a slow, predatory grin spreading across his face. "That's correct," I said. "Oh, Mark," he said, leaning back in his chair. "We are going to ruin them." He explained the power of discovery. Because they had sued me, I now had the legal right to request any and all documents and communications related to the case. And since their case was about me harassing them about their dam, I was now legally entitled to everything about that dam. Within an hour, he had drafted the most aggressive, all-encompassing discovery motion I had ever seen. We demanded every email, every text message, every internal memo, all meeting minutes from the HOA board for the last 12 months, all bank statements, invoices, and contracts paid to any contractor for landscaping or construction. Karen thought she was so clever filing that suit. She had just legally obligated herself to hand me the very evidence I needed to destroy her. They had 30 days to comply. But I wasn't just going to sit around and wait for them. I'm a reporter. The real story is never just handed to you. While that legal clock was ticking, I started my own investigation. Nail number 1, the contractor. Who was this bulldozer guy? Karen was arrogant, but she wasn't stupid enough to put his name in a public newsletter. I had a theory. This cowboy landscaping I'd found, it felt right. But I needed proof. So I did what I used to do when I was tracking a dirty politician. Just watched. I have a professional-grade camera with a telephoto lens that can read a license plate from half a mile away. I spent 2 days in my attic with a clear view of the winding road that led up to the Summit Creek HOA's gaudy front gate. I drank coffee. I waited. On the second afternoon, I saw it. A big beat-up Ford F-350 hauling an empty flatbed trailer. It was slowing for the HOA gate. I zoomed in. On the door, a faded, peeling decal, cowboy landscaping and tractor work. Bingo. I didn't need to run the plate. I had the name. I looked them up. The LC was registered to a guy I'll call Bill. His business address was a P.O. box, but his home address was on file with the state. I found his phone number in about 30 seconds. I called him. A gruff, wary voice answered. Yeah. Hi, is this Bill with Cowboy Landscaping? Who's a skin? I used my old reporter's voice. Calm, non-threatening, slightly official. My name is Mark. I'm a resident down in the valley. I'm just calling to get a quote for some tractor work, but first, I had a question. I was admiring the new lake up at Summit Creek. That's your work, right? I'm incredibly impressed, and I was wondering if your company is bonded for dam construction. There was a long, dead silence on the line. I could hear him breathing. It sounded shallow, almost panicked. I don't know what you're talking about, he said, his voice suddenly an octave higher. Oh, I said, pretending to be confused. That's odd. Your truck was just up there. I just saw it. I'm calling because I'm on the phone with the state contractor's license board, and they don't seem to have a record of your dam building license. I thought you could clear it up for me. He hung up. I smiled. I didn't need him to talk. His panic was the confirmation. This guy was a glorified gardener with a bulldozer, and he was terrified. He knew he was in way over his head. He was nail number 2. Nail number 3 was the most important. I could say the dam was dangerous all day long, but I was just a nosy neighbor. I needed an expert. I needed a professional. I called an old source. A man I'll call Dr. Evans, a brilliant, famously cranky professor of hydrology and geological engineering at the State University. I'd quoted him years ago on a story about a bridge collapse. Mark, he boomed into the phone. I thought you'd retired. Don't tell me you're digging up dirt again. I'm afraid so, doctor, I said. And this time, the dirt is literal. I'm going to send you a link to a secure folder. It has high-resolution drone footage of a structure. I need your professional opinion. Fine, he grumbled. But it'll cost you a bottle of that scotch you like. Done, I said. I sent him the files. I didn't have to wait long. He called me back 2 hours later. The cranky, booming voice was gone. He sounded cold. He sounded angry. Mark, he said, and his voice was flat. Where did you get this? It's about 2 miles uphill from my house. Why? I'm not going to ask who built this, he said, because they're not an engineer. They're not even a competent contractor. They're a moron with a death wish. What I am looking at is one of the most spectacularly unstable earthen structures I have ever seen. The slope is all wrong. There's no seepage control. There's no spillway. Do you see this part here? I heard him clicking on his computer. Where the water is darker, that's saturation. The entire downstream face of this thing is saturated with water. What does that mean? I asked, though I already knew the answer. It means it's not a dam, Mark. It's a pile of saturated mud. It's waiting for one good rainstorm or, God forbid, a seismic event. This thing isn't at risk of failure. It's in a state of failure. It's experiencing what we call liquefaction. It's just holding its shape by pure, dumb luck. I need to know exactly where this is. We have to report this. This isn't a problem, Mark. This is a potential catastrophe. We're talking millions of gallons of water. It won't just flood. It'll be a mudslide, a debris flow. My blood ran cold. This was so much worse than I thought. Doctor, I said, I'm in a sensitive legal situation. Would you be willing to put what you just told me into a sworn, notarized affidavit? For a court case. There was a long pause. For this? For something this dangerous? Absolutely. This is criminally negligent. I'll have a report on your desk by Monday. That affidavit was nail number 3. It was a sledgehammer. The final nail came a week later. On day 28 of their 30-day deadline, my lawyer got a massive 2 gigabyte zip file from the HOA's legal team. They dumped everything, probably assuming we'd never find the smoking gun in the thousands of pages of junk. They underestimated me. My lawyer and I spent an entire weekend in his conference room, fueled by coffee and righteous fury. We sorted by sender. We searched for keywords. Dam, lake, creek, permit. And then we found it. The golden ticket. An email chain from 6 months prior. The sender, Care. The recipients, the entire Summit Creek HOA board. The subject line, Lake Project Final Vote. I read it aloud. Team, I'm so excited. I've gotten the final bids. As you know, the estimate from a real engineering firm came in at over $500,000, which is just ridiculous. But I found a local guy, Bill's Landscaping, who can do the whole thing for $80,000. He can start Monday. My lawyer was just staring at me. He was motionless. I kept reading. A nervous board member, a guy named Gary, had replied, Karen, this is great, but $80,000 seems low. Are we sure he's licensed for this? And what about the county permits? Don't we need an environmental impact study or something? The packet from the engineers mentioned all that. I will never, ever forget Karen's reply. I have it memorized. Gary, please don't be a coward. This is our land. The county never drives up here, and they won't say anything if they do. It's better to ask for forgiveness than permission. We're voting. All in favor of saving $420,000 and getting our beautiful lake. They had all, of course, voted aye. My lawyer slowly, very slowly, took off his glasses. He just looked at me. She put it in an email, he whispered. He looked like he'd just seen a miracle. She admitted to knowingly skipping permits. She admitted to hiring an unlicensed contractor. To save money. This isn't just negligence, Mark. This is conspiracy. This is fraud. They're done. I didn't say anything. I just sat back. I thought about my dry creek. I thought about the $50,000 lawsuit they'd hit me with. I thought about Dr. Evans's voice saying catastrophe. I spent the next 2 days compiling everything. The no permits found report. The business license for Cowboy Landscaping, showing he was only licensed for mowing and planting. The panicked phone call I'd logged. The terrifying 9-page sworn affidavit from Dr. Evans, complete with diagrams of liquefaction failure. And the crown jewel, the entire "Don't be a coward" email chain. I put it all into a single, thick, spiral-bound report. On the cover, I printed a simple title, The Summit Creek Dam, a report on criminal negligence. I made 3 copies. One for my lawyer, one for my safe, and one for the State Dam Safety Division, the EPA, and the County Prosecutor's Office. I drafted a new email. I attached the full report as a PDF. My finger hovered over the send button. This was it. This was the moment I exposed them all. This was the nail. And that's when the cabin started to shake. It wasn't a slow rumble. It was a violent jolt. The coffee cup on my desk flew off, splashing black coffee across my floor. The monitor wobbled. The books on my shelves rained down around me. It was that sharp, shallow, teeth-rattling kind of quake. The kind that feels like the house just got hit by a truck. It lasted maybe 5, 6 seconds, and then it was gone. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. The cabin was still, but I wasn't scared of the quake itself. My first thought, my only thought, was the dam. I stood there in the sudden, dead silence. And then I heard it. It wasn't the earthquake. This was a new sound. It started as a low, deep thud, a structural crack that seemed to echo through the valley itself. It sounded like a giant redwood tree being snapped in half. And it was followed by a roar. Dr. Evans's words flashed in my mind. A freight train. He was wrong. A freight train sounds like it's on tracks. This sound was everywhere. It was the sound of a mountain coming apart. I ran to the front window, the one that faced uphill. I couldn't see the dam itself, not through the trees. But I didn't need to. I saw the tops of the pine trees on the ridge, shaking. Not like in a wind. They were vibrating. And then they just vanished. They were pushed over, like a child knocking over toys. My reporter brain shut off. My survival brain kicked in. My cabin was at the bottom of the hill. I grabbed my keys, my wallet, and grabbed the thick, spiral-bound report off my desk. I was halfway to the door when the sound changed again. It was closer. It was a hiss. The sound of millions of gallons of water, now mixed with dirt and rock and trees, and God knows what else, pushing its way down the natural ravine. The ravine that my creek used to run through. The ravine that was right behind my house. I burst out my front door and ran. I didn't even go to my truck. I just ran sideways, perpendicular to the flow, scrambling up the small rise on the other side of my property. I clawed my way up the wet dirt, grabbing onto roots, not stopping until I was at least 30 feet higher than my cabin. I turned around, panting, my heart feeling like it would explode. And I watched. It wasn't a flood. It was a river of dark, churning mud. It was thick like wet concrete. It was moving at the speed of a runaway truck. I saw entire trees, roots and all, surfing in the wave. I saw things I couldn't identify. Deck furniture. A barbecue grill. A kid's plastic slide. The torrent hit the back of my property. My little woodshed, the one Karen had fined me for? It didn't stand a second. The mud wave just erased it. It was there and then it was gone. The main flow was following the old creek bed, just as Dr. Evans predicted. It passed my cabin by maybe 50 yards. I watched, breathless, as the edge of the flow licked at my back porch, pulling my firewood pile into the current. But the cabin itself, it held. The foundation was high enough. The main flow was just far enough away. But it wasn't my cabin I was worried about. The ravine continued down the valley. And clustered right at the bottom, where the valley floor widened, was the rest of the Summit Creek HOA. The newer, even more expensive houses. The ones that had paid for the lakefront view. The wave of mud and water hit them. It didn't slow down. I watched, in total, stunned horror, as the mud flow smashed through the first McMansion. It didn't stop. It filled the entire first floor, blowing out the windows from the inside out. The house just collapsed on itself. The next one went just as fast. The force of the debris flow, the rocks, the trees, the wreckage of the dam itself, acted like a battering ram. It was pure, catastrophic, karmic destruction. The very lake they had built to increase their property values was now, quite literally, washing their properties off the map. It was over in 2 minutes. The main wave passed. What was left was a river of thick, brown sludge, 300 feet wide, where million-dollar homes used to be. And then, silence. A screaming, terrible silence. The only sound was the gurgle of the new mud river and the distant, agonizing groan of houses settling into the mud. I didn't move for a long time. I was in shock. This was worse. This was so much worse than I could have imagined. This wasn't just property damage. People could be. Then the screams started. And the sirens. Far away at first, then getting closer and closer. I knew what I had to do. I still had the report clutched in my hand. I hadn't sent the email. The PDF was still on my computer. But I had the backup USB drive in my pocket. The one with everything on it. I made my way down the hill, picking my way through the wreckage. The main road was gone, completely washed away. Emergency vehicles, fire trucks, sheriff's cars, ambulances, were parking at the top of the ridge, and responders were making their way down on foot. It was chaos. Searchlights cut through the dust and mist. Firefighters were yelling. I saw people, residents, covered head to toe in that same dark, stinking mud, stumbling around in a daze. And then I saw her. It was Karen. Her perfect blonde hair was matted with mud and leaves. Her expensive white pantsuit was ruined, torn at the knee. She was hysterical. She was grabbing the arm of a man who was clearly in charge, a fire chief, judging by his helmet and jacket. "It was the earthquake," she was screaming, and her voice was a shrill, panicked shriek. It just broke. It was an act of God. A natural disaster. "We're victims. You have to help us. We're victims." The fire chief looked exhausted. He was trying to get her to safety, but she wouldn't let go of his arm. I watched her for a moment. This woman, this arrogant, malicious woman who had sued me, threatened me, and built this entire catastrophe, was already spinning her lie. She was already crafting the narrative. An act of God. I felt that old, cold calm settle over me again. I walked past her. I didn't even look at her. I walked directly up to the fire chief. "Chief," I said. My voice was low and steady. It cut right through her screaming. He turned to me, annoyed. "Sir, you need to clear the area. This is..." Karen stopped screaming. She looked at me. Her eyes widened. Her face was a mask of pure, white-hot fury and terror. She knew. I ignored her. I looked the chief dead in the eyes. I held up the small, black USB drive between my thumb and forefinger. "Chief," I said, "my name is Mark. I live in the cabin up the hill. That woman is lying to you." Karen let out a sound, like a gasp. You? How dare you?" I didn't flinch. I just kept my eyes on the chief. This was not an act of God. This was a crime. That was an illegal, unpermitted, and dangerously unstable dam. And she, I nodded at Karen, knew it. She was warned. Repeatedly. The chief's eyes narrowed. He looked from me to Karen and back. "Those are serious accusations, son." "I know," I said. "I'm an investigative reporter. Or I used to be. On this drive," I held it out to him, "is a complete evidence file. It has the county permit search showing 0 permits. It has the sworn affidavit from a PhD in hydrology warning of this exact failure. And it has the HOA's own internal emails proving their president, Ms. Karen, knowingly hired an unlicensed contractor and skipped permits to save money." The chief just stared at the USB drive. He looked at me, really looked at me, and saw I wasn't a hysterical victim. I was a witness. Karen finally found her voice. "He's lying. He's the one who harassed us. He's crazy. He did this." I just shook my head calmly. "It's all in the file, Chief, including the fraudulent lawsuit she filed against me to try and silence me." The chief looked at Karen, whose face was now collapsing from fury into pure panic. He looked back at me, and then he reached out and took the USB drive from my hand. He didn't say thank you. He just looked at a nearby sheriff's deputy. "Harris," he said, "take this gentleman's statement. And ma'am," he said, turning to Karen, his voice now flat and official, "I need you to come with me. We have some questions for you." As the deputy pulled me aside, I watched the chief lead a sputtering, protesting Karen toward the command post. The judgment had begun. The truth was out. And the karma had been catastrophic. As the deputy pulled me aside, I watched the chief lead a sputtering, protesting Karen toward the command post. The judgment had begun. The truth was out. And the karma had been catastrophic. That was the last time I ever saw Karen in person. I spent the next 2 hours in the back of a warm patrol car, a blanket wrapped around my shoulders, calmly walking a detective through every email, every file, every warning on that USB drive. By the time the sun started to rise, painting the sky in reds and oranges, the valley wasn't just a disaster zone. It was an active crime scene. My evidence file did exactly what it was designed to do. My lawyer, David, called me the next day. He wasn't smug. He just sounded odd. He said, "Mark, the prosecutor's office is treating your file like a signed confession." Karen's act of God defense? It died the second they read Dr. Evans's terrifying affidavit about the liquefaction failure. It was buried when they read her "Don't be a coward" email. The earthquake didn't cause the disaster. It just pulled the trigger on the gun she had already loaded and pointed at her own community. The arrests were swift. Karen, first, of course. Then Gary, the nervous board member who voted aye. Then the rest of them, one by one, all pulled in for criminal negligence, conspiracy, and fraud. But the real justice? That came from their own neighbors. The ones who had lost everything. The ones whose million-dollar homes were now just mud-filled foundations. When they saw the evidence, when they learned their own HOA president had knowingly risked their lives to save $420,000, the fury was something to behold. The civil lawsuits were biblical. The Summit Creek HOA was sued into oblivion, not just by me, but by its own people. It was bankrupted, dissolved, and legally erased from existence. The cleanup took a full year. The valley was a scar of mud and heavy machinery for a long, long time. But then, the next spring, something wonderful happened. I was sitting on my porch reading a book, and I heard a sound. It wasn't the roar of the flood. It was something quiet, a trickle. I walked back to the old creek bed. The massive, muddy canyon left by the flood was still there. But at the very bottom, cutting a new, clean path, was a tiny stream of water. The natural springs, choked off for so long by that monstrous pile of dirt, had finally pushed their way through. I sat there for an hour, just listening. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. It's funny. I left my entire life behind because I was tired of fighting. I came to this cabin to find peace in the quiet. But in the end, I only found that peace when I used my old skills one last time. I had to fight, to dig, and to expose the truth, just to be able to sit on my own porch and listen to the water. My creek is back now, stronger every day. And the valley, it's finally truly quiet. Have you ever had a nightmare HOA story this bad? Let me know in the comments below.